Peace be with you. Dear friends, welcome to Living Flame podcast, website, and Facebook group. We are in the Holy Week, Gospel reflections for the Wednesday in the Holy Week. Gospel from Matthew chapter 26, verses 16 to 26. Jesus is saddened. He is saddened because Judas is going to betray him. And they have to prepare for the Passover meal. By then, Judas had already gone to the high priest and said, "What will you give me if I betray him to you?" Of course, they assured him 30 pieces of silver. Let us dwell on these few facts. Judas is assured 30 pieces of silver, which is called the blood money. Now, what was the intention of Judas? There may have been many intentions, but then betraying Jesus, that was a real crime. 3 years almost being with Jesus, Judas had heard the teachings, preaching of Jesus. He witnessed such a lot of miracles. He was close with Jesus. But then at this moment, he wants to betray Jesus. And that's why the sadness gripped Jesus at this moment when he was preparing himself to celebrate the Passover. It is not only the traditional Passover as the Jewish people were celebrating, but for him it was a passing over to the Father. So he was sure that his hour had come. And that's why he sent his disciples to the village or town to inform a man that he would be having his Passover celebration at his house. And the disciples go and prepare, and it is during the meal that Jesus says, "One of you will betray me." Of course, this is a fact that would bring sadness among all the disciples. But when we look at the features of these disciples, Judas betrays Jesus, Peter denies Jesus, and other disciples desert Jesus. That means Jesus knew exactly the weaknesses of these disciples. Yet Jesus chose them because he wanted to bring out something good out of their weakness. But in the case of Judas, perhaps he was beyond redemption. And that's why Jesus very clearly says, "The Son of Man goes as he has to go. But woe to the man through whom he is betrayed." It would have been better for that one not to have been born at all. Dear friends, dwelling on these words of Jesus, especially on this gospel passage, we need to understand how important it is for us to be in the company of Jesus, to be friends with Jesus, no matter how big is our weakness. One thing that we have to keep in mind, betrayal is a very serious sin. Now, how can we really overcome this desire, temptation to betray Jesus? It is keeping always Jesus in our heart, accepting him as our Savior, the one who saves me from my sinfulness. And that is why we know how Judas committed suicide, because he never accepted that Jesus would save him. In spite of his betrayal, Jesus would have forgiven him. But then he became so desperate, he committed suicide. There is no room for us to be discouraged in life. In spite of all our weaknesses and failures, we need to come back to Jesus. And that is why we have this great, beautiful, rich sacrament of reconciliation, especially in the Catholic Church, that we have to go back and ask for forgiveness. And Jesus, compassionate, understanding, will forgive us. In spite of the failure of Judas, Jesus would have embraced Judas at the resurrection if he had been alive. But then in that desperate moment, he committed suicide thinking that there is no hope for him. Hopelessness, dear friends, is the greatest failure that we can experience in our lives. But then in Jesus, there is always hope. He is the hope of the hopeless. Let us then meditate on this gospel passage and think that how Jesus has been so good to us. And that's why Jesus on various occasions said, I came not to call the righteous, but to call back the sinners. God bless you.